So Dr. Rob Manning, who is a total stranger to all of us, is our speaker today. He will be speaking on God's vision and God with us, Unitarian thoughts on the Gaza catastrophe. Rob is a longtime member of our family, a professor of philosophy at QU, and an ordained Unitarian minister, and our former minister. So if you would like to welcome Dr. Rob Manning.
Do that, do we? No. You have an extra treat today because Dr. Crăciun is also here from Romania. And to get us into this topic, you probably know one thing that's happened in Gaza is Israel has specifically targeted Palestinian writers, journalists, and intellectuals. And Donna recently translated a piece into Romanian, a piece of writing by a Palestinian intellectual. So she's going to start us off by reading a passage from that.
Good morning. And I hope I can see what I'm reading. When I was asked to do this, I was told that the author might not live long enough to see either the original or the translation being published. And it's not because she's terminally ill, but because she's trapped in Gaza. So here are Ala Al-Qaisi's words. Palestinians translate because we must, because silence is the final stage of erasure. But translation is not a neutral act. It is fraught with the violence of power. The Palestinian translator does not merely contend with linguistic challenges. They struggle against the structures that determine their words will be heard, distorted, or ignored. I've seen how English language headlines reduce the bombing of a refugee camp to an, and she quotes, airstrike killing civilians, a phrase that erases agency and responsibility. And I know that when I sit down to translate a testimony or a short story from Arabic into English, I am not translating into a blank space. I am translating into a discourse already shaped by euphemism and avoidance. The ethical dilemma is real. To stay true to the original Arabic, I must often confront the norms of neutral English, which prefers passivity over clarity and victimhood over resistance. To translate from Gaza is to walk a bridge built from broken syntax and broken lives, carrying stories that are too heavy to be borne and too sacred to be dropped. It is to speak into a wind that rarely answers, to speak names that echo back only to the one who dared to speak them. And still I speak. I translate, not because the world will change, but because not translating would be to surrender.
And I'd like to start this by reading a short passage from Peter Beinart, who's an American Jewish journalist and writer. And he recently published a book called Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, A Reckoning. My hope is that we will one day see Gaza's obliteration as a turning point in Jewish history. From the destruction of the Second Temple to the expulsion from Spain to the Holocaust, Jews have told stories to answer the horrors we endured. We must now tell a new story to answer the horror that a Jewish country has perpetrated, with the support of many Jews around the world. Its central element should be this: we are not history's permanent virtuous victims. We are not hardwired to forever endure evil, but never committed. That false innocence which pervades contemporary Jewish life camouflages domination as self-defense. It exempts Jews from external judgment, and it offers infinite license to fallible human beings. Now, I have to explain that I thought that we were singing hymn number 121, We'll Build a Land, and we're singing Imagine. So I got the Imagine part right. But I mentioned We'll Build a Land has you probably remember that hymn, and it has the refrain, come build a land where sisters and brothers anointed by God may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters and peace like an ever-flowing stream. I mean, if I could sing, I would have sang that, but I sure as heck don't want to do that. Now, I do begin this talk with that first hymn and that line. And in a real way, this talk creates a dialogue between that first very religious and hopeful hymn and the song from John Lennon, Imagine, which of course invites us to think about how the world would be better off without religion entirely. The spiritual hope conveyed in that first hymn seems rather haunting given what we were talking about today. The unfolding catastrophe in Gaza. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters and peace like an ever-flowing stream. That beautiful spiritual hymn, that beautiful spiritual hope deriving from the book of Isaiah in the Hebrew Bible and in prophetic Judaism, right, is so far from where we are today. Has future peace between Israelis and Palestinians ever seemed more impossible than it does today? After October 7th and everything since, is there any chance at all that Jews and Palestinians are going to sit down like brothers and sisters and create peace? Probably like you, I will never forget the shock and the horror of October 7th. You know, we just had the anniversary here in America of September 11th. And you will remember perhaps that the 9/11 Commission, in the report a few years after September 11th, in 2003, that commission concluded that the September 11th attacks should have been a shock, but not a surprise. The Hamas attack on October 7th, in just the same way, should have been a shock, but not a surprise. Tom Friedman had been warning for years that instead of building Gaza up, creating houses and businesses above the ground, Hamas was tunneling underground in order to attack Israel. And of course, on October 7th, you had to remember how Hamas was elected in the first place. This was part of that great optimistic period in the George W. Bush administration when they seemed to have so much confidence that democracy was going to win out and spread. That incredible confidence, like they seemed to believe that God was on their side. And that if you replace Saddam Hussein in Iraq and just let Iraqis free to vote, and if you let the Palestinians vote for their leadership, then people will come together like sisters and brothers and create peace. Now, back in 2005, the experts of Middle Eastern politics, the experts in the State Department, the kind of educated people that the current administration is trying to fire, they were warning the Bush administration that Hamas may well win this election and that the wisest thing to do is restrict the election to only the parties who accepted the Oslo Accords, meaning only the parties who have accepted the existence of Israel. In other words, Hamas should not even be considered a legitimate party in this election. But that overwhelming confidence of the Bush administration, no. And you know what happened? The Bush administration rejected that advice, confident in the triumph of democracy. Just over 40% of the Palestinian people voted for Hamas, and they took over the leadership. And of course, Palestinians have not voted since. You vote in a religious extremist organization as your leadership, and they are not going to allow you to vote them back out. And Hamas is apparently filled with religious extremists eager to start a holy war with Israel, confident that God is with them. And by the time Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, almost 2 years ago, Benjamin Netanyahu, in order to regain power, had aligned himself with the extreme right-wing factions in Israel. And in order to maintain his own grip on power, Netanyahu would have to please these extreme right-wing factions who were probably already convinced, even before October 7th, that God was, of course, on the side of Israel and should expand Israeli settlements on the West Bank and continue to push Palestinians out. This is exactly the situation of Israeli politics on October 7th. And when October 7th happened, you knew with Netanyahu in charge, along with his alliance with extreme right-wing factions, more than ever convinced that God was on the side of Israel. With that in place, on October 7th and after, anything could happen to the Palestinians. Anything. After all, from the right-wing Israeli perspective, if not from most of Israeli society after October 7th, didn't the Palestinians vote for Hamas? Didn't they vote for October 7th? Didn't they celebrate the murder of innocent Israeli families on that day? God is certainly with us, on our side, no matter what we do to these people. Something Netanyahu and his right-wing officials in the government have consistently said to the Israeli people and all Jews on the planet for 2 years. A couple months ago, after the October 7th attack, we held a program at QU to discuss the situation. We're a small university and we do not have many Jewish students or Muslim students, and our American students are pretty darn apolitical. So we are not one of those universities torn apart by riots and protests. We did have one Palestinian student who was able to educate our students about the displacement of Palestinian families and communities. When he was asked about Israel's military actions in Gaza, he said he wanted to find a particular passage he had in mind from the Quran. Well, like any contemporary student, he didn't have the Quran, the book. He just whipped out his phone and he found the passage and he read it. A passage which basically said that the Jews will be dominant for a while and then Allah will come and wipe them out and make his followers victorious. And this young man seemed to be genuinely convinced that through everything, God was on their side. So enough of God with us. Let's all sing Imagine again. And imagine how the world would be better without countries to die for and religion too, right? And all versions of God with us. We did that. This could be the shortest talk I ever gave at this church. That would probably be good. Now, some of us in this church are definitely in that position. Happy to give up all religious notions and all talk about religion or God. And some of us are more spiritually inclined, embrace some type of God language, and come to this church seeking a deeper spirituality. This has always been the case in this church, and it still is. And we have nothing to argue about. We genuinely enjoy our differences and just have great conversations. Love is the spirit of this church. I have deep sympathies with both of these very different and intelligent perspectives. To be honest, I really have enjoyed and still enjoy people in our church who think that all religion is absolutely ridiculous and that any intelligent person gave up the concept of God centuries ago. Some of these people who held this position have passed away, and I miss them every time I walk in this place. But you know, that's not really my own position, since I am essentially a religious philosopher. And I always hear religious thinkers and writers for whom religion and the life of the divine and spirituality are way deeper than God with us. In all this time, these 2 horrible years of Israel's unrelenting war on Hamas and on Palestinians in Gaza, there are 2 religious voices I keep hearing, and I hear them all the time. The first one is the voice of the contemporary Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, and the second is a Catholic voice from the 16th century, a mystic called Nicholas of Cusa. Now, Levinas is certainly the most important religious philosopher of our era. He was also extremely Jewish and even a Talmudic scholar. His parents and brothers were killed in the Holocaust. For him, Judaism really was all about an extreme ethical vigilance to, above all, protect other people from violence. Now, after World War II, he stayed in France rather than emigrate to Israel. And perhaps because of this, he was always extremely reluctant to criticize Israel. And you can go online right now and see articles and people condemning him for not being critical enough of Israel, which is true. But there is one line he said, I keep hearing through Israel's unrelenting war against Hamas. Levinas said, for those who have been victimized, for the victims, to think that they themselves are incapable of victimizing others is as loathsome as the words God with us written on the belts of the ex-SS murderers. And yes, the words God with us were written on the belts of the SS. Now, Beinart, in his book, he is trying to say to Israelis and American Jews who support this war on Gaza that they are buying into what Netanyahu and right-wing leaders are telling them, that their identity as Jewish victims of constant historical persecution means that they could not be persecuting Palestinians, that they could not be doing anything other than prosecuting a righteous war against Hamas. I don't know what Levinas would say right now about Israel and Gaza, were he still alive. I do know that Levinas clearly said that if you are a victim and you try to persuade yourself that as a victim, you are incapable of victimizing others, that belief is as loathsome as the words God with us and the belts of the SS. The other religious voice I've heard, especially in the last year of this unfolding catastrophe in Gaza, is a Christian cardinal and an intellectual and a mystic, Nicholas of Cusa. Nicholas argued that humans, of course, cannot see God. But in their own mystical spiritual life, humans can approach the divine life to a certain extent, not by seeing God, but by seeing in the way that God sees. God's vision is all embracing, and God sees everything at the same time. God does not see from one narrow perspective, but sees all and all perspectives. This is why, says Cusa, for God to see and for God to have compassion are the same thing. The spiritual life, according to this great Catholic mystic, is to see beyond our normal, narrow ways of seeing, to see from as many perspectives as we can, as broadly as we can. I know this sounds Unitarian, but this is a Catholic mystic. In this way, our vision will be filled with compassion. And for us to see will be the same thing as for us to have compassion. Now, Nicholas and Cusa had been speaking to me about God's vision and humans broadening their own vision to have compassion at seeing long before I picked up this book, Reinhardt's book, which just happens to have a chapter titled Ways of Not Seeing. We know the suffering, the violence, the famine, the starvation, the bombing, the destruction that is happening in Gaza and has been happening. Do we see it? The entire time President Biden was in the White House after October 7th, you had to wonder if he truly saw Palestinian suffering. He seemed to be perhaps a person of his generation, a generation who knew about the Holocaust and knew about incredible Jewish suffering. But was there something about that knowledge and that deep immersion in Jewish suffering that prevented Biden from really seeing Palestinian suffering? Another thing, almost certainly like all of us, right? I have family members, many of them, who get their news almost entirely from Fox. I was with one member of my family in Arizona during Holy Week last year. And we went to a Good Friday service together. The minister gave us all, during the service, several minutes to reflect on the suffering of Jesus on the cross by recalling and mourning the suffering of our fellow human beings right now around the world. Now, I was rather astonished when my relative said to me afterward that during those moments of mourning and reflection, she couldn't think of anyone who was suffering except those Jews who were killed on that. I also had another relative this summer while we were in Europe. You know, we were on this cruise together. And I had another relative who was very upset in Europe when he ran into graffiti criticizing Israel for what it was doing in Gaza or appealing for help for Palestinians. It made him upset. Now, it's not that my relatives are not kind and compassionate human beings. They certainly are, and they would be compassionate if they saw the incredible suffering of Palestinians. But they really don't have compassion for Palestinian suffering because they don't even see it. When it comes to seeing Palestinian suffering, is there a certain blindness produced by Fox and other right-wing media? Is there something like a generational blindness, even among Democrats, that we could see in the case of Biden? Is there a much broader problem? And do we need to think about a much more pervasive, general American blindness to Palestinian suffering? After all, here we are, almost 2 years into Israel's war in Gaza. The UN has declared that Israel is committing not just war crimes, but genocide against the Palestinians. Most of the countries in the European Union have agreed that what Israel is doing in Gaza is genocide. Major Holocaust scholars, including some of my teachers, some of them Jewish, have also come out and boldly declared that what Israel is doing meets the official definition of genocide. And Britain has now joined many countries in the world in condemning the war in Gaza and calling for an end to hostilities and for the creation of a Palestinian state without Hamas and an Israel without Netanyahu and his extreme right-wing allies. And yet, just this week, the American Secretary of State in Israel, with Netanyahu by his side, completely endorsed Netanyahu's strategy of totally destroying Hamas and assured him of our unwavering support of what they are doing in Gaza, even as they now invade and lay waste to Gaza City. Is there any other country in the world now that pledges unwavering support for what Israel is doing in Gaza? Given this extraordinary situation where we stand out among the world's nations in our support for Israel, one would think that American society must be torn apart right now over this question of continuing support for Israel, with massive protests demanding an end to American support for this war. But that really is not happening. Many Americans, perhaps most, really are not upset at what has been and is happening in Gaza, because when it comes to the suffering of Palestinians, perhaps they don't even see it. I have been asking myself all summer if I really see the suffering of Palestinians. Probably like many of you, my main news source is National Public Radio. Whatever happens in the world, I hear about it, I read about it, but I do not see. I don't really watch the news. And as the Palestinian writer Donna read to us points out, words hide at least as much as they express reality when it comes to the reality of horror, violence, and destruction. And nearly all my information about Gaza and pretty much everything else comes through words, not visual images. I am informed about what has been and is happening in Gaza, but do I see it? Even now, almost 2 years on, if I close my eyes and try to imagine what Gaza looks like and the suffering and the starvation and the misery of Palestinians, am I really able to see it? When I tell my students at QU that nearly all my news comes via the radio, they look at me like I am both 100 years old and from another planet. For them, news and information comes through a constant stream of visual images on their phone. Is this actually a better way of seeing? This talk ends with questions. Questions we should talk about during the talk pack and the coffee hour and after. Are there better ways of being informed and of seeing than the ones that I rely upon and perhaps that you rely upon? Do you feel you see Palestinian suffering? Do you feel there is something like a general American blindness, even now, to Palestinian suffering? Is what the Israelis are doing in Gaza right now, is it the genocide of Palestinian peoples? All Americans, right now, should be asking ourselves these essential questions. Is that happening right now? Out there in Quincy? Out there in American society? Yeah. It's happening here at this church.